Hey everyone, thank you so much for being here today. I'm Anisat, Ahmed, and for the next 30 minutes, we are going to be talking about something that sounds complicated, but it's actually beautifully simple, and that is ARIA. We're going to try as much as possible to introduce what ARIA concept is, just like a guide for developers, share certain tips and insights as to how best to understand ARIA. And my goal is simple. In 30 minutes, you will not only understand what ARIA really does, but also know when not to use it. So let's get started. Here's what we'll be covering today in my talk. We're going to be covering the invisible problem. We're going to look at the invisible problem that makes some websites hard to use. And then we'll go over ARIA fundamentals, what it is, and how it works. Then we'll unpack the three core concepts of ARIA, which is the roles, properties, and state. And then we'll also show some coding examples, a few of them, and then we'll wrap up with the best practices, common mistakes, testing and tools, and then action plan. So by the end of this talk, you will walk away not just with the knowledge, but with the things that you can actually apply in your next project. Okay? Yeah. So the invisible problem, right? Accessibility issues are really visible actually. And that's one tricky part about it. When we have two pieces of code, right, which literally does the same thing, they can look identical, but then they behave completely different for someone using assistive technology, for example, the screen reader, right? An example of what we have here, what you can see here is a very simple click me, right? Which is designed to be a button using the div element. It has a class of fancy button and on click to do something, right? But it actually looks like a button. Let's just put it in that concept. It is written to look like a button. But then a screen reader will just see it and just announce it as clickable, click me. But there's no context, no role, no meaning. So while we see a nice button, someone using a screen reader gets almost like no useful information because it just says click me. It has no idea. A screen reader has no idea if it's actually a button. It doesn't know what happens when you click it. It just knows that there's something clickable there. All right. And that's the gap between what we see and what assistive technology understand. And that's the real problem ARIA helps to bridge. Okay. Going over to the next slide. Like I said earlier, what a screen reader will announce is like clickable, click me, and it's going to translate it as, oh, there's something you can click here called click me. But I have no idea what it actually does or if it's even a button. Like that's like the translation it's gonna have. So why does it really matter to actually like have a proper understanding of ARIA? In general context, accessibility itself is really about helping users gain proper understanding of how to like use the elements we've created on our website, for example. And it's just really about clarity, right? Regardless of how a user is interfacing or interacting with our website content. And it's not just about trying to check out a compliance checkbox or something or trying to avoid a lawsuit. No, it's not just about that. It's about making sure that every user, regardless of how they access our websites, can understand and use what we build. So when we build accessibly, we're not doing extra work. It's not an extra work. It's us doing our job properly. Okay. And because a product that's confusing or impossible to navigate is not complete, people would not be able to use it, right? So that's why it's really important for us to understand certain practices in accessibility. We should not see it as an extra work, or is it nice to have, or I will just add that feature to my website. No, it should not be seen as that. Okay. So that's the essence of this talk, like just to introduce certain concepts that can help us bridge gaps. So now what I'll be talking about next is this HTML. As you can see from my slide, yes, I wrote like HTML speak two languages. So that's like a kind of an analogy I want to go with in trying to explain the gap between a visual language, the visual content the user sees, and say, for example, a semantic structure or semantic content that will help assistive technology properly interpret contents to users who are using assistive technology to interact with your site. Like I said, the visual language is let me put it this way, it's what sighted users see, right? They could be like colors, the brand colors you have on your site, the layouts, the animation, the beautiful animation, over effects and things like that have been added, and the way things behave naturally in terms of how you handle those content on your website. And then the second language I want to go with is semantic language, which is what most accessibility advocates always preach about. It should not just be about how pretty your website is, but how well structured your website is. So the second language I'll be talking about is like the semantic language, and it's what assistive technologies interpret. Say, for example, this is a button. Assistive technology, when it interfaces with a button, it's going to interpret it as a button, a well structured button. When it interfaces with a proper heading level, say, for instance, this is a heading level 1, it's going to announce it as this is a heading level 1, this is a navigation, things like that. So that's like the second language HTML understand. Screen reader users most often experiences the semantic language. That's really what helps them in interacting and navigating properly with our website. And the crucial part is these two languages, I would say, they need to say the same thing. They should not be different. They need to say the same thing so that regardless, people would be able to understand the content. So when they don't say the same thing, but when something looks like a button, say for example, but doesn't say it's a button semantically for assistive technology, that's when we can have an accessibility problem exist to make sure that those two languages always say the same thing. It gives extra context to elements when plain HTML is not enough. It's how we had more, let me put it this way, semantic meaning when HTML alone is not enough. And that's what ARIA is, not some complicated framework we need to like hard to make accessibility to help us do some accessibility fixes. No, it's just like a way to just bridge the gap between. That's why I use the analogy of two languages, the visual and the semantic. So where HTML is not sufficient, ARIA can come in and then add more meaning to ensure that the plain HTML starts to make sense for assistive technology users. So then I'm saying ARIA. ARIA actually stands for Accessible Rich Internet Application, all right? ARIA is a set of attributes that tell assistive technology that what something is, what it does, and what state it's in. That's where the three core concepts that I mentioned in our agenda earlier comes in. So we'll be touching more on that later on in this talk. I want you to think of ARIA as translation notes for screen readers. That when you how do I want to put it? They're just notes that don't change how your code should look like, but they're just like additional information, like I said earlier, for assistive technology to really understand. So when I say role, what is that? Role is like defining what an element is, like adding more definition to what an element is, right? It announces the names and descriptions to things like ARIA are labeled by things we'll be covering later on. And it also like communicates the states it's in. Or say for instance, is the accordion expanded or is it, or if is the button selected, things like that. It's just like adding more notes for to help assistive technology to understand better what an element is. Like I said, think of ARIA like a translation note. ARIA attributes they just add more context to what you have as your elements. So without translation notes, that's the first code. From what you're seeing on the screen, the first code is designed to be a menu, all right, and it has an on-click event. Now, that is an element, a div element without ARIA, sorry. And the second one is with translation notes. That's ARIA. In this case, we're trying to like give a proper understanding of ARIA by saying, okay, ARIA is similar to a translation note. So when you see that, just know that's what I'm trying to explain. So the second div element, which you see there, you can see that more things are being added there. So the purpose of those things are to define a menu would be like a button, right? So the essence of adding ARIA to this and this menu element is to properly help assistive technology to understand that, oh, when it encounters this menu, it should behave as a button. That's the role we are defining it to be. And then we're giving it a label of, okay, open navigation. That's what is it called? Like an open navigation menu. And so this is to help more, to add more context. So we are going into like diving into the three core concepts that we can see at first here. So the first concept is the role. The role like defines what the element is, like I said earlier. So for example, like we showed in the earlier code, it defines the code below as a button, even though it's a div, right? We added the role button into the code for it to be able to behave like a button. So the next core concept is properties. Properties is like a set of characteristics that we've added for elements to provide more details, like to describe it. Say for instance, you're trying to describe your your anti-blue light glasses. You're going to have it described to someone, oh, it has a blue frame, it has a blue lens when it's being stared at. That kind of description, that more details you had to your elements, that's where the property concepts come in. So for example, in this code, the button is given a property of ARIA label, and we're telling it that, oh, this is a closed dialog, all right? And that's like the property we're giving it, just to add more characteristics to help describe what that element is doing, okay? The next one is the state, all right? The state kind of defines what is currently happening with that element. So for example, it could tell if a button is currently being selected, or that's if the button is active, or if it's pressed, kind of thing. So that's where we add the states, and then we can use that attribute there, which is the ARIA pressed, to be true, to tell that, okay, the current state is what? True. That's just like a very simple example of how the three concepts play together, okay? I've been mentioning, the example I've been given is, okay, a div created to act like a button. The reason that was used mostly is because that is like a common mistake so many developers use. They try to use div to build everything when you can just actually go ahead to use semantic HTML. So that's like the golden rule here that I'm trying to explain, that no ARIA is better than bad ARIA. So the first thing first is to always go first with the native HTML. Always go ahead to, before you try to use div to play around and customize certain elements, try to see if those elements already exist in semantic HTML. Okay, use buttons for buttons, use navigation navs for navigations, use inputs for inputs. Don't try to design a div to look like an input field. All right, so that's like the first step to avoiding few accessibility problems, because there's some instances where we might be trying to fix an issue, an accessibility issue, but in the actual sense, we are even creating more accessibility issues. So the first golden rule is to use native HTML first, and only reach for ARIA when there's no like semantic elements available. And don't, like I said earlier, don't try to re-implement built-in behaviors like I said, buttons, inputs, and things like that. When you actually really need ARIA, so use ARIA components when HTML alone is not enough to describe it. So for example, there's no actual HTML elements to say carousels, to create a carousel, unlike the way we have a button that can be used to design a button. A semantic HTML button, that's the button elements that can be used to like build out a button. Nothing like that exists for tabs or carousels or modals or navigation notifications and things like that. So this is where we try to build out some things with divs and then style it for it to look like a modal, or what which could be whatever elements we're trying to build in mind. Avoid ARIA for standard controls or uncertain cases. Always test first. Those are also part of the things that we need to consider when actually deciding on when to use ARIA. So the first thing first is to use ARIA components when you don't have an alternative means to design an alternative semantic HTML to designing that element. So that's like a very brief introduction to how you can really actually know when to use ARIA. A few code examples. This is an example of without ARIA. So as we can see here, the div element is created to display a notification message saying message sent successfully. But in the actual sense, no announcement will be made if an assistive technology is trying to or if an assistive technology comes in contact with this element on a website. There's no way for a user without disability, they will be able to see that that's the message, a message successfully sent. But a user using this assistive technology like a screen reader would, like I said, would definitely get no announcement. So now looking at the second version, we've added the three ARIA attributes we talked about earlier: the role, the description, and the state, right? Here we added the role to be a notification, right? To give that status notification that this is a status. So we're trying to define the role of this notification that we're building to be a status. All right, so the next one is the ARIA live. So the ARIA live is another attribute that we use to announce. So we're subtly telling that this should be announced politely. So that's like a characteristics we're trying to define for that notification. And then the last one is just tell it, okay, message sent successfully. So that's the actual content of that notification. And these two attributes that we've added would completely change the experience for an assistive technology. It's going to give more context. Now the message is going to appear. The screen reader will automatically announce it to be a message sent successfully, compared to the first version that we have on the left side of the screen. For users, say for example, a user without a visual impairment can read the first one to be message sent successfully, but then it's not helpful in any way if a user using the assistive technology does not get any feedback, no response, no announcement. So this is what we're trying to explain earlier on, that those simple changes can really make a huge difference in how our users, diverse range of users, get to experience our web content and how they are built. So one line of code can really make your app work for everyone. So that's for the notification. And then we have for our models, that's another example that I have today to like use to further explain this introduction to ARIA. And there's always one problem with modals. The problem is that when a modal open, a screen reader user would not like often realize that okay, that modal has been opened, or probably what the modal is for, or how to close it. All right. And visually, when we talk about the visual language, it's there. Okay, it's opened, but then on the screen reader side, it will not see it. There's an X to close it, but then the screen reader will not also see it if it's not properly announced correctly, or the roles are not given. They're not like added, or not even or they are not added, or they are added and not added correctly. So that's another case, right? The solution here is to like add a couple of ARIA attributes. So the first one is here. We're given a modal here, a role of a dialogue. So that's like the role we're defining, so that whenever a screen reader encounters that element, you'd understand that, oh, this is a modal dialogue. Okay. And then the next one is the ARIA labeled by, which falls under the properties concept. So this is the characteristics we're trying to define for it. And we're saying that, oh, the ARIA labeled by points to the heading that serves as the dialogue title. So we are going to be pointing like that property to the heading. All right. So then another description we're giving it is the ARIA described by. So those are like pretty much setting quick references. At the end of this talk, I'm going to show some quick references that you can always like follow through to help you further understand that, okay, yes, this is what this is. And there are also a couple of more resources that I'm going to be sharing so that you can have more context to ARIA elements. For the ARIA described by, we're saying that, okay, this P elements would serve as the description for our modal, so that when it's announced, the screen reader knows, okay, this is what this modal is meant for. And with the title, the screen reader user can get a preview idea or a short idea of, okay, what this modal is about. And that will be like, okay, confirm delete. So when it announces it as confirm delete modal, the screen reader user knows and is prepared that, okay, this is for me to delete something. All right. And then it gives that more context to the description of the dialogue to be, okay, are you sure you want to delete this item? So that's really helpful. Just those two descriptions is adding more context to help improve the experience of the screen reader user. And then a couple of other elements there is just cancel and then delete. So if the user is still going to go ahead to delete, they know like how to move their cursors, how to move their keyboards around to help them navigate to the delete section if they still want to delete or just go back. So just those few things helps compared to not even adding any of those things at all and just having your div and an h2 and then a p tag and then the two buttons and styled beautifully in the modal box. It's cute visually, but then functionally it does not help screen reader users. Yeah, so that's like the purpose, and then we are trying to provide more context for screen reader users, like I said. So the common mistake, I think I mentioned one common mistake earlier, but so many developers, aside from, okay, I think I mentioned the common mistake the other time. I remember now. The common mistake I mentioned was using divs to create buttons, and we've already talked about how not to do that. So we should always use like semantic HTML first. So that's great. Then another common mistakes is adding ARIA to everything, every single element. And that's not great, because when you add ARIA or use ARIA when you're not supposed to, like I said earlier, that's like adding more accessibility problems, like creating more accessibility problems rather than fixing those problems. Another one is adding interactive elements. Like I sometimes when I like click on the inspect of certain website, I see ARIA hidden true. And I'm like, no, that's one mistake that people also make, developers. Not not like forgetting keyboard support. ARIA usually doesn't had keyboard functionality, so we still need things like on-click events and keyboard handlers and things like that to help with keyboard functionality. So we should not think ARIA is going to like add those things for us automatically. They are not. They don't work that way. We already explained like what ARIA does, just adding more context, right? So we should have that note, like adding more context to help screen reader understand certain elements that are not built with semantic HTML. So that's like the best way to break it down. Also, I think I mentioned this conflicting roles or invalid states. Maybe for a button, we are assigning it a role of a dialogue, right? That's like creating an accessibility problem, or giving a dialogue role of a button. There are other different roles that we can always like reference on the MDN documentation or authoring practices. Yeah, by ARIA. Yeah, like I said, those common mistakes, yes, they have solutions. So the fix will be to always use the semantic HTML, and then we test with our keyboards to ensure that users can navigate with the keyboard without the mouse, and then test with screen reader to ensure that okay, these things are now synced correctly. So there are tools and technologies that we can use to do those testing. Like I put here, we should do the keyboard test first. You navigate without a mouse and ensure that the focus is visible and logical, right? Yeah, that's just unplugging your mouse and try to navigate with your keyboard. Can you navigate everything? Can you activate it? Yeah. And then are they focused around your elements, like your buttons? Do they have enough focus that will help assistive technology users as well? Also, there are screen readers you can always download. NVDA you can download on Windows, but Mac itself comes with a voiceover, so you don't need to download those. Just listen, just use this screen reader tools to help you listen to how your page is being like announced or described. And then there are also automated tools that you can use to check for errors on your site, maybe just to check and spot if you can find ARIA errors or no ARIA errors, or it could be any other errors, right? So you should, when you're testing your site, don't just test for only ARIA, okay? Just go through everything and ensure that everything works, okay? So yeah, baby steps. Slow, like I used to hear, slow progress is better than no progress at all. So it's not like a 1 day thing to get it all right all at once. It's tiny changes that could yield remarkable results, that could provide impactful changes to help improve the experiences of our users, right? So automated tools like Ask, DevTools, Wave, or Lighthouse could help spot those issues, and then you can look at how to fix them and try to retest again manually and see if everything works correctly. I was talking about quick references. There are a couple of roles that these are like common ARIA attributes that you mostly use all the time: buttons, navigations, dialogue, alerts, status. Remember, don't go first using a div to create a button, okay? Always go for the semantic way of creating a button. Okay, that's like a quick reference for roles, a quick reference for labels, for properties, adding properties. Like we had the ARIA labeled by in one of our examples, and then we use our IDs to target them. I think we had that in one of our examples. The area described by, like I said, we had in our example, our modal example, where we had a p tag to provide more context, more description. So we used the area described by and targeted it using the ID and added that inside of our. That's that. A quick reference for state. Okay, is it an expanded one? Is it open? Do you get it? Is it closed? Using ARIA expanded, setting it to true or false, or ARIA selected, setting it to true or false. These are quick references, like the ARIA aiding true or false that we mentioned for interactive elements. That's why I said that it's a common mistake, because there's so many elements that developers will just go ahead to put ARIA aid-in to be true, just so that to fix maybe an accessibility issue they're trying to encounter or something like that. That ARIA aid-in mostly say, oh, should screen reader ignore it? It should always be used correctly and rightly. This is the another one quick reference for live regions. That's all still under properties. The ARIA live should be announced politely or assertive, like announce immediately or announce when idle, just to provide more characteristics to that element we're trying to create, where plain HTML is not sufficient. All right. So when we are trying to do these steps, these baby steps, we're learning, we're growing, we are trying to, like, as much as possible, ensure that our websites, our content are accessible. It's also very important to build an accessible workflow. We should not always make accessibility to be something that should be considered when our site has launched and our users are complaining that, oh, they cannot access certain things on our website. No, it should always be built from the very beginning. Start semantic, then enhance with ARIA when you want to build elements that plain HTML does not suffice. Then also adding accessibility checkers to accessibility checks, to our pull requests. We should also automate certain things, and while you automate, it's also important to also test manually, just like going through checking manually to see if everything announces correctly. And it's also important to like include accessibility testing into things like our design system. So when all of this is part of our process, it stops looking like an extra work. Oh, it's an extra work, I can't do that kind of thing. So yeah, so that's why it's really important. So another action plan I would say, aside from building accessibility into our workflow, is that we should keep learning. We should read why ARIA practices, authoring practices about ARIA to learn more and build more. Nobody knows it all. Quick insights, knowledge about certain things is really helpful than not knowing at all. So it's very important as professionals, as developers, we should learn about these best practices. We should also audit. We should test our keyboard flow. We should run Ask Dev tools. We should start with high impact issues, like issues that that are really impacting our users. We should start with those. We should also keep accessibility into our PR and review processes. It's just like those small steps that will really make a huge impact. So the key takeaways here is, what I want you to really remember is that ARIA should not be like our checklist or things like that. It's about respect. It's about respecting that people use the web in different ways. And it's about ensuring that what you build is usable by everyone, okay? And it's not just the web as we personally experience it. It's about building for the real diverse users, all right? Every ARIA attribute you write is an act of inclusion. Every ARIA attribute you write is an act of inclusion. Those done the right way, okay? So it has to be done the right way for you to write something that's an act of inclusion. That's the art of accessibility, making sure that every users feel included. Yeah. That's it. And then we have a couple of resources, like I said, that will be added to the end of this talk. The why ARIA altering best practices. You can always visit that to see a list of more ARIA properties, roles, states that you can learn to use. We also have the MDN ARIA documentation. It's also a very detailed documentation that explains more ARIA concepts. We also have the WebAIM article on ARIA. I think WebAIM had a very detailed article on ARIA, which I've included here. And then I also linked to a couple of tools that was mentioned earlier, which is like the Ask Dev tool, the NVDA, and the Wave. Okay, that's it for me. If you have any questions, just send it to me. I'll be more than willing to answer to the best way I can. Thank you so much for listening.